asking you, I know that you've been in the academic world for a while before you embark on the entrepreneurship journey. Can you share with us what you have been doing in the past and what inspired you to start the entrepreneurship journey?
So can anybody hear me from the back? So first of all, I probably have to thank the organizers for inviting me to today's startup. I'm pretty honored to be a speaker because I didn't think that I would be one. Because if some of you might know, I've recently shut down a company. So to do with the first question regarding my background, so my original career track was actually to be an academic. I actually did my dream PhD, which was theoretical physics. Did cosmology, published papers, and then I decided that I would like to have a nice room to myself with all the academic books, etc. And sometime after I finished my PhD, I was doing a postdoc in the Human Genome Project in the Sanger Institute, and we will be looking at all the human genome, the latest thing that's ongoing, etc. At that point in time, because I've been involved a lot with my college, so I was in Cambridge and my college was Darwin College. I have a friend who came by to me and said, hey, there is this society in Cambridge called Cambridge University Entrepreneurs. They need someone to help to build a conference with MIT. MIT 500K is pretty well known. They have generated a GDP of companies of 100, I think it's $1 billion. So they want to do a conference with Cambridge and we need a guy to run this. And you probably have run this because you were in theater, you ran theater productions that were making money. Because in the era theater, usually you don't make money with things. And so I said, okay, fine. So I took it on, did the project, made a lot of good friends with MIT, learned a little bit about entrepreneurship, learned a little bit about business plan, then was looking at some opportunities in the biotech space. Did my first company in the UK through a business plan competition, and then they subsequently went on to raise a Series A funding. It's a technology that we use to replace animal testing. The company is still around, but I don't know whether they have gone further than where they are. It's called Simogen. And then after that, I need to come back because I need to serve my bond. So I came back to Singapore. I worked for 2 years. During the 2 years when I was back, because of what I did with MIT, so the NUS gave me a young assistant professorship with entrepreneurship. So at that point in time, I did a couple of things. Probably one of the things that I did do is to set up SGEntrepreneurs.com, which we have recently rebranded to be SGEIO. It's probably the longest serving website on entrepreneurship news since the beginning, 2005 when I was back. So, and in the process after 2.5 years with the Genome Institute, I decided that I want to be in the private sector because I think that I like building businesses, I like making a difference. So I have an end goal. I would like to build a foundation to promote science, and I need $100 million. So that was my planning. So because of that, I got into private sector. Started a company in 2010 called Chalkboard, which unfortunately we raised money from Joey Ito from Neoteny Labs. We grow as fast as we can, but unfortunately couldn't raise any money, and a couple of things happened along the way, and we crashed and burned. So at the present, I'm actually shutting down the company. So now I'm currently with a company called Vistaprint. I think for those who are in the US and Europe, you probably have heard of this company. They are a printing company, it's a public company. Probably to say that I've joined the dark side in the corporate world. But actually, a very interesting thing is that the role that I'm undertaking is actually the lean startup in a multinational corporation. So I'm building a product that's basically for the emerging markets. And it's a very interesting set of challenges, exactly like what a startup is as well. So that's where I am now. Yeah.
I know that the Chalkboard has been publicly talked in
in
a lot of places. But can you still summarize again what are the lessons learned? What will you do differently if you could have started it again?
I think the easiest way to think about it, I sort of distilled it down to 3 principles. This is the 3 things I will not do in my next startup. Okay. The first thing I'm not going to do is that I'm basically going to build a startup that has direct transactions. And what do I mean by that? I want to basically build a startup that I can actually collect money immediately. That means I'm able to make a transaction. It could be an internet service, it could be a particular product that I can sell to collect a check, make sure it's for value for my customers. That's the first thing I would like to do. So, could be e-commerce, could be offline retail, could be anything else. So that's the first component that I want in the next startup I'm going to build. It has to be direct transaction. Okay. The second part of it is that I will try my best not to partner with anyone. Part of the mistake that Chalkboard made was to have too many partnerships. We got the biggest group of partners. We had HTC. We're supposed to preload an app. We're supposed to get distribution. We didn't do very well on that. We depended a lot on our partners in terms of trying to get our APIs on everybody's to run our location-based advertising. So for all those who are here who didn't know what Chalkboard was doing, we're doing something called location-based advertising, where we are kind of like the Google Ads for the small and medium businesses. I think the value of the business is there, but unfortunately we couldn't get the distribution. So while I was in the months that I reflected about my failure, I read this really good quote from the chairman of LVMH, Louis Vuitton, LVMH, and bringing on this comment, and I sort of now put it sort of in my list of things to remember, which is the second principle, is that if you control your distribution, you control your brand. So that's the reason why I probably won't partner anyone as much as I can, unless there's a real strategic reason, unless there's a real good reason that it makes sense. And the last of all, which is probably the one that I will probably piss off a lot of people, is that I will try my best not to raise any money, as much as I can. It sounds really strange, right? Like my first company, I raised $500,000. When I was doing Thymos Capital as an early stage investor, I raised $5 million. And then in Chalkboard, we raised another $1 million. And then coming back to all around in full circle, and then I realized, oh yeah, actually I don't need to raise a single money. Come on, SGE is running decent revenues, modest revenues now. It was set up with almost zero cost. And it's running as a proper business. We're doing advertising for our advertisers. We're delivering value in the ecosystem. We help to connect entrepreneurs. And quite interesting, I was thinking of releasing the news today, and I just got clearance from my boss, which is Gwen. I think some of you might know, my co-founder from SGE. Recently did some rebranding. We have just launched a new product. Basically, we're actually going to be doing premium reports. So this is actually, if you have an iPad now, if you type i.sge.io, that's basically our new insights. Why we want to build that product is not, we want to serve startups, and we discovered that a lot of investors are looking for intelligence about startups. And we try to basically help startups to try to give that information to the investors that are more valuable. So we thought that it's a direct transactions, because you can see that how much of the failures I actually tried to apply to grow SGE as a whole. Yeah. You want something?
Just a comment. I just wanted to commend SGEntrepreneurs. I find information there very, very valuable. And in fact, when I moved to Singapore, that's where I got all my information, and eventually went to Guide Me Singapore and did all my application process, Entrepreneurship. So thank you very much for.
Thank you very much, Joe. Yeah, I think the very important thing that sort of came back to this is that whatever I want to do next, be it a startup or whatever, I would like to deliver value. I think this is something that we don't think about a lot in this ecosystem. I actually was very heartened when I failed. Okay, one of the things I probably have to mention is all my competitors, my friends, and my fellow entrepreneurs in the ecosystem all sent me emails, and we all had a very good chat. This is surprising. It's the only space in Singapore, I would say, if you are a failure, you have friends to support you. And I was very heartened by that. I think that we're in a very fortunate space now that you can actually get this type of support. Because I thought about it, if I were to do Chalkboard 20 years and I failed spectacularly, I'll be probably publicly shamed by that. So I thought that this is a pretty strange ecosystem. The ecosystem have grown in a way. Yeah. Any answers? Or shall we continue the conversation?
In the earlier years, you have been involved in a Thymos Capital.
Yeah, Thymos Capital, yeah.
Early stage investor.
Yeah.
So from the angle of an early investor, what do you think? What should be the focus of the startup in the early stage?
So Thymos Capital was a fund that we did a couple of years ago. So the fund ran its full course. We recently have sort of formally shut down the fund, but we still manage the portfolio of companies. So a couple of things I look out for as an investor. Actually, I have one company that got acquired. It's called iHypo. The founder of that company eventually went on to do deals.com.sg. I will tell you that I actually given the chance to actually partake in investing in deals.com.sg, and I did it. So it was enjoyable. But so what I want to tell you is that it's about people. Investing is about people. The best deal that I've ever done was done in 5 minutes. It's a company we invested called Interact, but actually it was part of it was actually an offline of a very established company called Lunch. Actually, it's a offline dating site. The entrepreneurs Violet and Jamie are amazing entrepreneurs. They came and then we had a quick chat, and basically they tell me what their vision is, what this product is about, and immediately I said, let's just do a deal. Tell me what is your equity, take it. I took it, they took it, and we're very happy. I'm a very happy investor because eventually I became an investor of Lunch actually because they merged the assets. And Lunch actually is now is growing through multiple countries. But what I thought was interesting about it is the type of preparation these entrepreneurs are. So one thing you do see in funding funding entrepreneurs that are very, very good sense, they know what they're doing. That's one. Whenever I have any investor meeting with Jamie, he will come up with the list of all his competitors, the list of the request in a very concise manner that what he wants from me. And basically I just make that. So if you want to sort of make your investor really interested in what you're doing, you probably have to build up the relationship first. And I wouldn't suggest that you just meet the person and pitch the idea. I think you should figure a way to try to build a relationship with this investor, and then slowly, if you decided that this is the person you would want to work to invest in a company, you should go with this investor. Because ultimately anything about equity is really, those are not important. The ability to work with really interesting people is what being a good investor is about. Yeah. I probably would be introduced. I actually have one of our Thymos company, which I'm not going to name yet, has recently been, actually they moved to the US. They just recently have gotten into a very prestigious program. I think next year I'll be able to tell you which company that was also under my portfolio that does so.
I know that in Singapore now there are a lot of fund from angel, from private, also from government.
Yeah.
In your view, where should they go for the first time entrepreneur? They should look for the early stage.
Okay.
To find them.
So I want to ask a question because I would like the people out there to more engage in this conversation. How many of them are looking for funding at the moment? Okay, how many of you are thinking of taking on a government fund, say like the NRF, TIS incubation scheme? One. How many of you are thinking of iGEM 2 fund? Okay, I think before you take on the government funding or work with these incubators, you need to think through two things, okay? And this is the experience I'm getting. You need to be able to deal with a lot of bureaucratic bullshit, okay? And you need to figure out exactly to have every paperwork in order. You almost need a liaison officer to help you to deal with the government. Okay, so that's the first thing you want to do. Okay, on the whole, the intention of all the schemes, whether it's iGEM, NRF, is good. Okay, I think the Singapore government is really trying to promote entrepreneurship as a help. The execution is a little bit tough because they need to justify why they're spending taxpayers' money to fund you. So that's why you need a lot of the bureaucratic stuff that you need to do. If you can withstand that, and you can deal with having a longer period of time to wait for the funds to come to you, then my answer is yes, you can go for a government fund. But if you're always living on the wire, and you're trying to figure out exactly where you're trying to build something as fast as you could, my suggestion is try to build a sustainable business first before you even think about receiving any funding. Sounds very counterintuitive, but it's crazy. Yeah, sorry, you were saying?
Well, I just was curious, how do you know when you need help? How do you know when you're trying to do too much or taking on? I mean, is there something that you look for to figure out, maybe I need to bring in someone to do X, Y, Z?
I think, okay, so that's a very interesting question, and I actually think about that question a lot ever since Chalkboard's failure. So I've been asking myself, what are the things that I did wrong? And I think part of the mistake that you think about is, are you a person who plans ahead? So I started reading a couple of very interesting books. One of the books I probably read was a book called The Corner Office. I don't know whether it's actually a very famous New York Times columnist by the name of Adam Bryant. He basically interviews all the top CEOs of the world, founder CEOs, etc. And one of the interesting things that, and also Ben Horowitz's blog from Andreessen Horowitz, and they both mentioned two very interesting things about CEOs needing help. They said the better entrepreneurs and the better founder CEOs tend to have one very key characteristic, is the ability to plan ahead and to do something that they are not comfortable in. Now, let me reinforce how do I answer this question. So imagine you have built up different so what you need to do is to start planning to build up what your capabilities are. So you want to build up your product, you may want to build up your sales arm, you might want to build up your HR, you might want to build up different aspects of the business itself. You can't do all of them all at one go. What you need to do is that you need to have a game plan to see what is the first step I need to do. Does it reach this milestone? Once it reaches this milestone, you need to go ahead. Now, the problem with that is that you may be very slow. But if the point of it is that being slow is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's better because you take time to actually have the thinking process through. So one interesting CEO that I read, book that I've actually read was unfortunately the book is written in Mandarin or in Japanese. If those who can find the book to read is Tadashi Yanai. He's the founder of Uniqlo. How many of you buy Uniqlo? Yeah, the book, the title is quite interesting. It's called One Win, Nine Defeats, and it's all about failure. And his whole point is that a lot of the mistakes that he made, particularly in doing things like expanding to other countries, etc., was all done without proper planning. So you must have whatever you are doing now, continue to do what you can, but you try to be more complete in terms of thinking of the different aspects of it and break them down into small tasks. And then you'll be able to figure out, then you have a plan. And that's when you know when you need help, because you probably will find out that, hey, actually I'm very weak in sales, right? I need to find a sales guy, especially why I need to find this guy or that guy. So you find that in that sense of the way you think about it is probably easier on that.
Okay. I mean, I guess I just have someone follow up to say that, is it better to launch early and less perfectly, or to really get everything in order before you?
Yes, it's actually okay to launch early and get feedback, because in modern days, people are actually more open to failures. If you look at some of the really open failures, like how many of you use the app called Path, P-A-T-H? It's probably one of supposedly the best mobile app. Their first version of the app was atrociously bad, but the second version, they made a change. They realized what the users were really doing. They actually iterated on it. It's the same even in what I do today, particularly with what SGE is currently working on, which is this whole premium report. If you go to i.sge.io, we actually released the report first, but we actually did some work to make sure that the product is near complete. We show it to people, we do some really field testing, and it's supposed to be done in 1 month, but we did it in 3. But we really focus on building product. I think whatever product launch you want to do, you must ask yourself this question: is your product really delivering value? It could make mistakes, but if your product is not delivering value, then does it have that? Should you launch it? Yeah. Shall we go on? Or any other questions? Or any follow-ups?
Yeah, question from Madam.
Yeah.
You've been having the CEO recently in the Chalkboard. So you also write an article on SGEntrepreneur about ask against the entrepreneur whether you really want to hire a CTO.
Yeah, a CTO, right? Like whether you should find a technical co-founder. So this is, I'll tell you exactly the basis where this question really comes from. So as an entrepreneur in residence in East Business School, I get to meet MBA students who want to set up companies. And this is actually like, what you see, unlike what I usually do is I actually take data about all the guys who come in and try to figure out what they are interested to know. And I discovered that all the questions that they typically ask me, the first question they ask me, do I need to look for an engineering co-founder? So regardless of any business ideas, okay? And the rationale, I can understand where they're coming from. The reason why they're coming from that perspective is because they are building something like a tech startup, but what they didn't really know is the type of business their tech startup is in. So basically what I did was I broke it down into 3 parts. If you are building something that's already known, say an e-commerce site, or you want to build something like a new site, okay? You want to build a portal that helps people to, have a social network for dogs, or for example, right? Then it's existing technology. You could easily don't need a technical co-founder. You could probably look for someone to outsource to, or basically you can even build it yourself using simple tools out there like Drupal, etc., content management systems. The second type of it is that you need to build something, but you need to make a tweak onto the service that may not, that doesn't exist there. Like for example, maybe you're doing something like a particular mobile app that allows you to track people, but is to sort of help you to sort of make sure that you know the whereabouts of a dementia. Maybe you need some features in the technology such as is whatever. Then yes, you do need an engineering co-founder to help you with that. Or then if you're building the third type, which you're building something that no one has ever done it before, you definitely need a technical co-founder. But you need a technical co-founder that actually shares your vision. Okay? So on that 3 types of people, I discovered that most of the business school students that comes to me with their ideas, they all fall into the first group. So what I've been trying to tell them to do is, you should try to build a first version of your product with existing tools. If once you know what you do, you probably would know how to outsource it, because you know exactly what the product is. So this is something that how many of you know a company called Second Market? Yeah, you all heard of Second Market, right? Second Market is a platform where people can trade private shares. So the founder, I think it's Barry Sidwell, he went to the Stanford Entrepreneurial Thought Leader Series and he asked the audience, he said, when I started Second Market, guess what my minimum, when I originally started, they wanted to raise, I think something like 10 million to build this fantastic platform for them to do trading, exchange, everything else. They drew up the specs, it was a 100-page business plan. And then at the end of it, nobody wanted to fund it, okay? And then he knew that there was an opportunity. So guess what he did? He told everybody, well, my minimum viable product to my 5 sales guys was very simple, an Excel spreadsheet. It was an Excel spreadsheet that they built their entire business on. So what was really figured out was that through the Excel spreadsheets that they were doing, because they were trying to buy out collateral debt, they figured out the correct type of platform, how a person would be able to use to do the trade, to buy private shares, etc. And they built the actual platform later. So you see, you could go down to the minimum viable product to a spreadsheet, right? But learning how to automate their processes may be much more interesting than just trying to try to build a platform at first, but you don't know whether you're serving your actual market. Yeah, sorry.
Well, so you said you want to find someone who shares your vision. What does that mean, I guess?
Well, it just means that whether the person believes in what you're doing. So does he have the same alignment as you in terms of where the product is going to be, where the product roadmap is going to look like, right? If you don't believe, if your engineering guy keeps battering you every morning, then that's not the product, that's not the guy that you want to work with. Or alternatively, I would suggest to you an entrepreneur. I think he runs this company called Game Monkey. His name is Keith Ng. He and his co-founder apparently they were working on the same projects for 4 times, and they hated each other, etc. And then they now end up to be co-founders of the same company. I mean, that's an amazing story, right? Because I usually like to tell the story because they always tell me that it took them so long to basically to go in bed as business partners. In fact, it is true that your business partner is almost like your spouse. So it's pretty important to know whether that person you can actually work with. It's actually not easy to do, okay? To find someone to work with, etc. I also discovered that in the process of my founding of companies, I prefer to work with younger people. So a lot of you would probably know, I mean, for Chalkboard it's slightly different because my co-founder and I, we know each other for 8 years. But a lot of people like to talk about my relationship with my co-founder in Chalkboard. Very few people actually ask me, what's my relationship with my co-founders in SGE or .io or This Week in Asia. No one actually knows how I actually discovered these co-founders. So I can tell you a little bit more about that. Like This Week in Asia is pretty simple. The guy and I, one of the other co-founders, actually the owner of Malaysia Entrepreneurs, okay, which is my counterpart in KL. And we were always like saying that we need a talk show for Asia Tech, okay? And we just want to do a minimum viable product. So we took our Skype, we got a recording, we got this guy called Mike Fong, who's by day he works for Oracle, but by night he's a top podcaster. And then we built the show, and the show is now about 100 over episodes, you know. So that was something that because we've been really thinking about it, and we really want to do it, and we really want to try it. So that's one type of co-founder I had. When was slightly different? We worked together in startup in Singapore together with my other co-founder. In fact, one of the hidden co-founders of SGE is this guy by the name of Wei Chang Lai. I didn't tell you his backstory. He actually did his 2 successful companies when he was having cancer. Okay, he was actually and he built one of his current companies called Otaku House. He's actually selling anime merchandise. It's a very successful business, by the way. So they are younger people. I like the energy. I like the way they think about things. In fact, I see Gwen usually give me a perspective that I don't see. I'm a very fast, execution-driven person, but sometimes she gives me this deliberate pushback. So I don't like to work with people that don't push me back. I like people who try to push me back and say, do you thought about this? Do you think about that? Have you sort of figure in that sense? So when you look for, so to be really exact, to talk about co-founders, you can actually, you think about that. These are the kind of things. Because you cannot be always agreeing on one thing, because that's very, very dangerous. Because you're in the founding of the company, you make certain decisions that may be fatal later. Yeah, like in the case of Chalkboard, we made a very fatal mistake of trying to fight a war in 2 fronts by going to the US. Yeah, we thought it would work, but the reality on the ground was actually much tougher than we thought it would. But it was a good try. But if you think back about it, you know, it was because we were thinking along the same line. We didn't push back each other in terms of that. So I think that's very, very important.
So how do you define a good co-founder? Now they are similar to you or they're on pay?
No, they should be a reflection of. They should act both as a person who can actually debate with you. Okay, that means they are someone that you can respect. You can argue to the end of tomorrow, but at the end of the day, you're still friends. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is that they must have the ability to execute even if they do not agree with a certain initial decision that you've made. Yeah. Like for example, when we were, I'll tell a little bit of a story, quite interesting, how I got back to SGE to help out. So after 2010 when I set up Chalkboard, so I spent all the effort to work on Chalkboard, and SGE was passed to Gwen. Gwen runs it. She builds her own team. She did a pretty good job with it. So sometime back in the end of last year, she was giving us the annual report about how SGE was doing, and she was just saying that actually I need someone to sort of help me to bounce off some ideas, etc. and etc. Since you are a co-founder of the company, you might as well, can you just give me a hand? And I said, well, that's interesting. How could I be of help? And we discussed that maybe one of the first things we want to do is content, because there is an ongoing complaint. Just to let you guys know, in the publishing side, in tech blogs, we are very conscious of the fact that our writing the quality of writing is not as high as what you are seeing in the Western world. So the first thing we did was we focused a lot on getting the quality of the writing up. So that was the first thing that I was supposed to do. And then slowly she said that, hey, I need some thoughts on where we should be moving towards, right? Because there may be too many tech blogs. And why is it there should be 3 tech blogs publishing the same set of press releases? Doesn't make sense, right? So then I asked her, what is the value that you want to deliver to your customers, right? So we came up to the consensus, and then we end up with the premium reports. We pushed back each other a lot, like, hey, I think you should do this. And then she said, no, we don't think you should do that. But at the end of that, we have a consensus. We have a consensus to say, this is what we want to do. If we didn't make it for this, we answer to ourselves that at least we look at all angles. So you need to have this understanding with your co-founder. When you brainstorm, okay, you can go against each other and argue and etc. Then you round up the discussion and wrap up and say, hey, what's our next step? That's the real decision point. Then you both should come to a consensus on the decision. I think this is the type of things that we don't talk a lot about in founders, etc. But I think this is very important. Now the same goes for your employees too. So this is something I thought maybe I should share with you. When you hire your first 5 employees, it's very, very important that you listen to their feedback and their brainstorm. I think it is very Asian culture to be very hierarchical, to think that you know what you're doing. But sometimes you should think of, you shouldn't have this form of ideology of, oh, I'm the founder, so I know everything. These guys are working for me. No. Your employees, the first 10 employees, you should figure out how to make them be part of your culture. So a lot about what we built in SG in the last year through Grant's efforts was all focused on trying to build a culture. How to make sure that the people who work for us are enjoying themselves. Like Terrence, for example. I see him as a founding employee. Isaac, for example, is a founding. I don't see them as employees. I see them as being part of like a founding father to the company. Like able to take it to the next stage. And I think that this is something that I would like you all to think more about, because trying to get a culture into the company is actually not so simple. And the successful companies out there actually have very, very strong cultural values. So what is really needed is to figure out how to make the environment really enjoyable for people who work with you. Yes, there are tensions, there are things, there are deadlines, etc. But as long as you can build that culture of doing it together, is a very, very important part of it.
So it's been that you should know your co-founder for maybe for a long time before.
So that's funny. My first group of co-founders, I try not to work with people that I know. But it's kind of strange, yeah. I try to work with people who I think that I can. There's something that this person have that I don't. So I try to figure out the person. But as I become more and more experienced, yes, I do look for someone that I know. I do look for someone who can push me back, because I can be very, very, I want something done. I want to get it done. I want to, to make more deliberate. As per what I'm working on now, even in the corporate, I'm also developing another set of skill sets that I previously do not have. So you become more deliberate, you become more thinking in terms of overall itself. As an advisor now, even to a company that I co-founded as well, as in for SGE.io, I just spend maybe once a week an hour with Gwen and the team having a chat and just figure out what are the things that we want to do. And I think this is very, very important. I was surprised actually that so she built an entire team, right? So there are a lot of team interns, etc. So they had a party. So I went to the party, and one of the interns walked up to me and said, "You should write more because your articles are always so different and etc. And gets a lot of readers. And why is it?" And it's like saying that why aren't you guys doing it? It's like because, but they are excited about it. And I think that's important, right? If you have even your interns more, whether the interns, whether the other people who are part of the company that are really excited about what we are doing, then you know that there's something there. And then the instinct of the entire team is to move towards trying to make the company successful. Yeah, we talk about how sexy is to raise 500K, we talk about how sexy is to launch a product, but we don't actually talk about how sexy is to actually build a company, which is the harder part. And maybe that's the lesson that I want to share at this point. And this is the thing that I'm still thinking about very hard. Yeah, I draw lessons not just from myself. I drew lessons from my father-in-law, who's a very successful entrepreneur. I also draw inspiration from friends who are very successful entrepreneurs, and getting a sense of how they think about something. And I think that is very, very important. That would help you to figure out what a successful business will look like. Yeah. Anyone else?
Just going back to, I guess, hiring or finding a CTO. In terms of getting funding perspective, is it really important to have a CTO?
Right.
Although it's probably the technology is already existing.
So okay, so where would you find a CTO? So this is also a question. So to continue the answer of that question, usually there are 3 routes to find it. One is to go to all the programming groups. So there's a lot of programming groups now. There is the Ruby Brigade, there is the Python user group, there is the SG Geek Girls. I was wondering why is it that 40% of the attendees are men. There are also I'm just making a joke out of that. There is the iOS Dev Scout group. Now, you can be a business person. I would suggest you attend this because this is where it's the same with business networking. To get engineers to work with you is the same as to get business people to work with you. You need to network with them. You need to understand what makes them tick, right? So this will be the venues where you could go to the hackerspace. I know a lot of startups came up from the hackerspace because a lot of the business guys were hanging out there, and we have animators hanging out there. In fact, the interesting story was we had 2 animators hanging out there, and they were finishing a project on government funding and they ran out of money. And guess what? The technical guy said, hey, you should use Kickstarter. And they actually went to Kickstarter, they raised 5K to basically finish their filming project. And guess what? Because it was spread through all the geek guys who teach them how to put a project on Kickstarter, they raised 12K. They over-raised basically in the early days of Kickstarter. No. So having meaning people in these places would help you to figure out what you want and what you do not want. Because which platform you pick is not important. So surprise, right? Everybody will say, oh, it should be Ruby, it should be Python, it should be PHP, it should be whatever. I've worked in all 3 platforms, okay? So the Chalkboard was in PHP, and then after I moved on to Python. Currently, my current job requires me to know Ruby on Rails. In each of the platforms, it has its strengths and its weaknesses. So you need to know basically which of the platform can help you to build to what your business objective is. And is this person okay to be able to build with this objective? There are very, very good tech people out there, but what you're going to find is that the best tech people out there tend to be very, they tend to prefer a freelance life than to be a CTO. So in order to convince this group of people, you need to have a real vision of what you want to do. Seriously. I will give a very interesting example. Like, how many of you heard of a company called Impulse Flyer? Yeah, Impulse Flyer. They do deals with luxury. The CTO of the company, Andy Crow, is a very well-known Ruby on Rails developer in Singapore, right? Very good designer, etc. And the CEO actually managed to get him to be on board as a CTO. But that's also because they knew each other previously in previous company. But you got to know what. It doesn't matter what the technical skill level can be gauged in different things. Like you do due diligence, you ask other developers what this guy is like. You could also get them to go through. Well, if you're a bit more extreme, you can get them through code tests, which is a little bit tough. Okay. But if the good guys will tell, you could use things to gauge them, as in you want to know what have they built. Look at their previous portfolio projects. Those are the very usual indicators. I'm going to say that to network for a tech co-founder is the same as the tech guy looking for a business co-founder. Right? The tech co-founder cannot go to a tech event to look for a guy in sales and business development, right? You'll probably have to go to a business networking session to look for the other guy. So So I see a lot going from this to this, but I very rarely see the other way around. So when I try to help, this is funny, like I get calls like, where can I find a CTO? And I'm like, not really difficult one. I go to Hackerspace pretty often. I could find like 20 guys who I think you can look for to do this. So I think that's one of the answers that I would give. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
And is it really important to have a CTO if you're looking for funding? In terms
Yes.
of investors?
Yes and no. I know some investors are very high on you must have a CTO, you must have a whatever. Yes. To some investors, yes. To some investors, no. But you have to have someone to be able to handle the tech side. Okay? That means be able to manage a tech project. There are cases where I think what some investors don't like to have, even if they don't want a CTO co-founder, they want to make sure that it's not one founder situation. Because it's very hard to, it's a one-man show. You're trying to get, you're trying to look for someone who can build teams. So from an investor point of view, it's better to look for a team. The companies I funded, I know iHyper wasn't a tech. They don't have a tech CTO. That's one. Let me think. Yeah, all of the other ones have CTO, but that's because the CTO come to me for funding rather than the CEO. So different story. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
How do you view tech companies who outsource their tech?
Your core competence is not a problem. Okay. So I actually have something against outsourcing. Nah, just joking. I think that there are certain parts. If you want to outsource something, it cannot be a core function of the company. If you are a tech company, you should never outsource your core competency to someone else. Okay, I've outsourced products that I do to companies, and I build it in-house. I actually prefer to build an in-house team. Now, to build an in-house team is actually tougher. So I'll sort of tell you, there's a trick to it. Okay, you should never hire one programmer. You should always hire two programmers. Okay, because one guy is very tough because all of you is going to lay everything on this one guy. You need to have two. So in order to distribute the work. So to build successful in-house teams, you should always hire in pairs. You should never hire in one. So that's the first part. I would say that if you want to outsource, you probably have to do low-level projects. Like for example, maybe you want to build an admin system that helps you to do some small stuff, or getting them to do some backlog work, or maybe to help you to make something better, maybe have a database to be process faster stuff. Yes, you can outsource that, but you should never outsource your core competency of the product out to somebody. All companies outsource some parts of it, but they never outsource what is important to the business to outside. Otherwise, what happens is that they can also shut your system down if you don't pay them, right? Think about it from a security perspective.
So just to build
Yeah.
on that, you mentioned two programmers. Are you talking about doing the same functions, one particular functions of your?
So in a
tech?
startup environment, it's actually more challenging. So you probably do one front end and one back end. So that's what you do first. You get in pairs, and then you get the second pair to come in to be their understudy. So you should hire two at a time. You should never hire one at a time. Yeah, that's something that I think a lot of people don't think about. Well, maybe this is all gained through experience, but even today when I start thinking about hiring technology people, I always think in terms of pairs, basically.
Even for technology companies, how much do you think would be the repartition of investment between marketing and compared to technology? Because there are a lot of good
Yes,
products.
this is a very interesting question, and I think I have a correct answer now. It all depends on how you plan for it. So, like I said just now, right? To think about building a company, you have to be much more complete. That means you need to start to think of all the pieces that you need to build within the company. So the way how you want to know what's the correct mix of business and the tech people you need to have is to look at that plan and decide that, hey, I might need 2 engineers now, they have to build the product to this particular milestone that allows this sales guy to sell it. Now, if this sales guy can sell it well and help me to make twice the amount, I should get another sales guy until the demand of the product is so high that the 2 engineers cannot cope. I will hire another 2 engineers. So you balance the business needs and the business needs and the tech needs. What people tend to do is like doing binge drinking. Like people who drink beer, etc. They do binge drinking, drinking tons of beer. It's the same thing here. You try to overload on programmers thinking that you can build the best features, but you don't have a sales guy to go out to do the sales side. Or you overload on the sales guy because you don't have it, and poor technology guy got pissed off and eventually end up quitting on you. So you need to balance that perspective. You should think in terms of that the technology helps you to enable that business function, and what is the limit to that business function. That's what my thinking is now. That means if I have a plan, I know exactly what I need. I know exactly what is this piece. These are the 5 jigsaws within. Each has its own piece. I want to fit it, but I need to know when I fit this, what do I need to make sure that it happens in order to put the next pieces. So you need to find those pieces correctly and then fit it correctly into it. That's how I think about it from there. I think that's probably the best answer that I've actually thought through this question quite a lot lately. Yeah. Any other question? Shall we go on? Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was about to ask. So you talked about the minimum viable product a lot.
Yeah.
Do the customers generally give you time? I mean, will they be forgiving if you put out something that's not, doesn't have everything that they might want? And then it's almost like you have to ask them to reevaluate you if you do another release later on, right? And
well, I said this during PhilCon before. I said, there are only if a person if you put out a product and nobody does it, either the person is not interested in your product, or it's so bad that they don't want to use it. Now, if it's bad and they have a very bad reaction towards it, you just make it better and get them to do it. You know how many times did Steve Jobs showed a Toy Story to Larry Ellison? I think according to one of the interviews, he said he actually went and told Steve Jobs, "I'm not going to go through another screening of Toy Story. You've showed me the same movie 72 times." Yeah, and it's quite interesting because what it was I'm trying to tell you is that you can constantly badger people to try to use the product. It doesn't matter. It's how much hustle you want to do, right? But if you really thinking of building the perfect product, right? So you would want to get customer feedback. If it doesn't work, change the name. Say I've created a new product, right? Like for example, Foursquare as an app is really fantastic. It has actually had an earlier incarnation called Dodgeball. It was a different name, whatever. Foursquare is just the 2.0 version of it, leveraging on the mobile platforms, etc. So you can have that situation. There are 101 ways to spin a product story, because the first product is usually not the product that you would end up to be correct. You need to figure it out. Yeah. Yeah.
I have 2 questions for the audience actually. So who is on the tech side here? Wow, cool. And who's looking for tech people or co-founders?
Alright, so today is oversupply and under demand. So you can go and walk and talk to them.
So we should all talk.
See, it's not hard to find, and I can tell you that there are very, very good developers here. And I actually think that you can actually find them. It's not hard to find. Yeah, I usually think it's not hard to do. Any other thoughts? Any other tough questions for me? I'm here to answer tough questions, so yeah. The tougher the better, because it also makes me think even after that.
In terms of if your whatever idea or product you have, if so say like you did all the minimal viable product, you get feedback, if you realize it's only incrementally better than whatever that's out there, versus being completely disruptive, do you just forget it?
Yep. Not as it depends on how much you believe in the product itself. Whether it really solves the problem of the users. I think that the way we need to be more to think a little bit more is to be more customer centric. When I mean by customer centric is mean that is there a need for them to use the product? I like to use this example because when I was an investor in Thymos Capital, there is a particular type of companies I would never invest in. It's the virtual worlds, Second Life type of products, okay? And I always have this line, I always make this comment, and I made it as a joke. I said, well, if we are so busy with our first lives, why would we have any time for a second life, right? And it wasn't meant to be mean. And I even told people who are working in the space and say, hey, look, whatever I say, don't just treat it, just take me as I'm just being a jackass, And if you really believe in what you're doing, you should just go ahead and do it. The same thing that whenever I tear down someone's idea in an ERR session, the immediate thing after I finish tearing it down, I would just tell them, hey, no harsh feelings. I'm trying to help you, okay? You're better off hearing the crap from me now than to have all your friends keep laughing you that it's a great idea, and I might as well be honest with you. I'm not the kind of guy who will say nice things about whatever, right? You have to internally evaluate whether this is what you want to do and this is what you want to take the product itself. I can tell you 99% of the products that all of us build are all going to be incremental, okay? Because the 1% of the innovation is very, very difficult to do. Yeah, like when we think about going into the premium report space from SG, just thinking about that, we took a very, very hard time to really look at ourselves and say, are we ready to be able to do this? And we really focus on trying to build the report for our customers for the people out there who are interested in investing in startups here, right? Because we want to help to build a story for startups here. But we cannot just rely on very, very small pieces of data. We need to dig deeper, we need to understand the industry, we need to really, really know what we are doing. And that process itself, a lot, and even talking to people within the space itself, I'm trying to provide these reports, we need to really, really dig down into it and say, hey, is there a value? And we're going to put out our first report. We don't even know whether people will buy it or not, right? We have to test it. At least we could tell ourselves, hey, we did try, right? If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings, go back to the drawing board and start over again. Probably, I think every successful entrepreneur has at least tried it, like failed once before, whether they tell you publicly or privately, etc. Right?
I have a question about revenue sources.
Yeah.
So let's say at the beginning you only have one or two revenue sources, and then you figure out that, okay, it's going to make your business sustainable, but it's not going to make you rich.
Yeah.
So at what point do you start, really scoping out all the different ways of bringing in revenues? Or do you think most people just do that much later, or they do it at the beginning?
I think a lot of people in the tech startups falls into the group of people where they try to do it later and it's too late. I think if you are in the Asia setting, so that is quite funny. I was making this comment to it was on Twitter actually, and I said that if you are a successful startup, if you want to be a successful startup in Asia, your company must be able to generate revenues, and then you think of building traction. That means building a brand. If you want to be in the US, you should be building the traction and the brand, then you build revenues. That will help you to solve this Asia-US problem. I think you need to think in terms of whether you can get paying customers. I think the ability to think that is actually very important. Look at Chinese startups, it will be very interesting. A lot of Chinese startups, look at a company called Tencent. They were very focused on revenues at a very, very early stage. It was very similar to ICQ, their messenger. You think about it, Microsoft had the MSN messenger at that point in time. They have tons of traction. I think it was at one point, 300 million users. 300 million users in 2003, in the year 2003, before the Web 2.0, before Facebook, etc. That's a very, very large number. Why didn't they not create value in terms of revenues for them? Because they were trying to build the traction, but they also had some internal problems. For example, they didn't put the best guys to work on it. They didn't try to figure out what's the business model for it. But Tencent, on the other hand, they built the same thing, but because they are strapped up for funds, they have to figure out how to make money from it. And because they figure out how to make money from it, they're able to take the same reasoning in whatever products, even if they clone a US product, they're able to be very disciplined in executing to get the revenue on that. A successful business must be able to generate revenues, but it's not rocket science, because you're trying to build value not just for your customers but also for yourself, right? It's a win-win situation from that. The only question is whether people will pay for the service you provide. Yeah. I find that there are some ideas. There was one of my I think Wei Chang, one of my co-founder, who he actually built a business out of necessity. He discovered that a lot of people want to buy these things, and he set up the entire business on that. And he sees opportunities. In fact, when it comes to sometimes talking about where we should go, I usually defer to him, even though he likes to say that he learns more from me. I actually learn more from him in terms of thinking about revenues, thinking very, very hard about it. Yeah. You should not just mix, okay, here's something. You should not just mix with people just in the tech sector. You should try to mix with people in different other business sectors. Because I think the perspective of looking at revenues traction becomes very different as you widen the circle of thinking. Yeah, I know tech is a very sexy thing, but there needs to be some kind of reality to sort of ground you and say this is how you should look at something from that perspective. Yeah.
Any other questions?
No other questions? You have any other questions for me?
Yes. Now you came in the Vistaprint.
Yeah.
You say about this startup environment in the MNC.
Yeah.
So what are the best between that and the typical pure startup environment?
I actually enjoyed my current work. So I've been in academia. The reason why I was in academia because I know I'll never be in business or in a corporation. Oops. Then I went into starting my own business as an entrepreneur. So I went to the startup phase, and then now I joined a multinational corporation, and it's quite interesting because for me, why I decided to go into the corporate sector was because this is one important question that I think a lot of us know, but we never want to address it we never want to be part of it, is that all these multinational corporations, at one point in time, they were startups too, right? How did they make themselves to the point today to be a multinational corporations? Because they found the capability to scale. So they, even within the processes itself, would be able to help you to think about scaling. So for me, I'm actually fortunate to be given a project that is working as a startup environment. It's a lean startup environment. So I'm in a team of 4. I work with very, very good engineers, amazingly good engineers, okay, who are founding engineers of the company. We're trying to build a new product. We have a very different strategy for this market, or emerging markets, and we do that. So it was perfectly startup environment. We have constraint of resources, right? When we build the product, we actually launch a beta of our product, etc. But here's the funny thing. The problems that I have in a startup to get a product to launch is typically the engineering problem. It's typically whether the product works, whether I can get the first group of customers to try, etc. When you do a startup in a multinational corporation, your problem is the reverse. And okay, if you're created your own websites, you have this page called Terms of Service and Privacy, right? Right? Usually, what would you typically do? You typically will go to a US website, cut and paste the language, modify the language, and put it in your website, right? Right? Oh, of course, that's what all startups do. When you go to a multinational, no, you can't do that. You need to talk to the legal department. You need to explain exactly what your startup product is. Yes, it's a startup, but we have a brand, we have a perspective. And it made me appreciate for the first time why the hell why am I actually cut and pasting Terms of Service and Privacy if I don't really know exactly what each of them talking about. I actually spent time actually read through everything, went to the legal side and say these are the terms and we want it to be this way. And there was a lot of back and forth till the point, 2 days before launch, I just got it to be approved. Yeah, and you have to have very, very supportive people. the current the president of the sort of the we call the most of world's business unit from Vistaprint. My boss Mark Easter was from Microsoft. Was a great guy I learned something from. He has a very strong